The 1990s were a time of real experimentation in video games unlike anything else. While obviously you have a lot of craziness happening at the dawn of the industry, and I would say the VR scene today certainly counts as taking a risk, it was the early part of the 90s that saw publishers and developers really trying to figure out what they thought the future of their medium would be. Sega and Nintendo had firmly planted themselves into the cartridge-based 2D platform with the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and the arcade scene had some really beautiful looking games taking advantage of the power that came with a dedicated cabinet. It felt like what Nintendo and Sega were doing was to not only compete with each other, but also compete with the arcade. They already had the built-in advantage of owning your games and not having to pay every time you wanted to play them. The arcades had their own advantage, offering you experiences you couldn't get at home, plus tickets you could win and trade in for mustache combs. But the gap was thinning out as so many people were perfectly fine playing Street Fighter II on their couch, rather than at a busy mall arcade with a time limit only as long as how much your father could stand waiting for your mother to try and close at JCPenney. Enter the compact disc.
No, Jules, it doesn't play records, it plays CDs. It's a CD player.
A new audio format to replace vinyl that launched in the early 1980s, pioneered by Sony and Phillips. As the decade wore on and technology improved, it made sense that developers saw the potential of what video games could be on a disc. If done right, you could theoretically make the current crop of home consoles look like children's toys and outclass even the best-looking arcade games. NEC was the first to jump in the digital pool, releasing the Turbografx CD add-on for their Turbografx-16 home console. While NEC was the first to hop on the CD bandwagon, they would be far from the last. Everyone wanted their shot to become the new king in the video game castle. What follows is a rabbit hole full of fads, awful games, and high prices with low returns. Welcome to Perfect Reload. Today we're going to talk about what I would call the sinister six of the early CD-based game consoles. The Sega CD, the Atari Jaguar CD, the FM Towns Marty, the Phillips CDi, the Commodore CDTV / Amiga CD32, and the 3DO interactive multiplayer. In a future episode, we're going to drill down further into the defining games of this era, but for today, we're focusing on just the systems. First up, let's go back to the future, hit 88 miles per hour, and feel the power of love with the FM Towns Marty. Considering this was a Japanese-only console, it's unsurprising that it isn't talked much about outside of hardcore gaming collectors. It was marketed as the first 32-bit CD-based console back when people would fight to the death at the playground about what system had more bits. It doesn't matter that your mom left your dad for Billy's dad, Craig. What matters is that the Atari Jaguar is mathematically superior to the Super Nintendo. Fuck you, Billy. Like a lot of what I would call fad consoles, the Marty had a short lifespan, being released in 1993 and sunsetted only 2 years later in 1995. It only mustered 45,000 units sold, which would be the death blow to any piece of video game hardware. Hell, video games themselves selling that much have folded entire companies. I can't speak to collectability as I've been out of the video game collecting scene for almost a decade now, but just typing FM Towns Marty into the video game section of eBay while writing this script brought me less than 60 results total. The cheapest game offered was a copy of 4D Driving for $60, and the most expensive was Splatterhouse for just shy of $900. I would say that you definitely need to be devoted to collecting for the Marty. One final note, because it's just so awesome and so 90s, the Marty had a spin-off called the Car Marty, which was exactly what you think it is, a model made for installation in cars. Complete with a navigation system, you could also detach the whole thing and play it at home. When I was a kid, I thought having a car phone was the coolest thing in the world. Now we take for granted our hands-free Bluetooth world, but back 25 years ago, I would have killed to have gotten a satellite phone in my car. I have no idea who I would be calling other than friends to tell them that I'm talking to them on a car phone before hanging up. Commodore had made their name in the early 80s with the Commodore 64. It was a revolutionary home computer that fostered an amazing gaming scene over the years. Fast forward to when the company decided to start lighting their cigarettes with trillion-dollar bills, the Commodore Dynamic Total Vision was a hybrid CD-based video game system that could be easily converted into a full-fledged Amiga 500 PC. It launched at $1,000 in 1991 and was marketed as a piece of consumer electronics instead of just a PC. Commodore wanted this to fit into the home theater enthusiast setup, as the housing looked much more like a piece of stereo equipment than a traditional sweet beige 1990s computer. Commodore knew what they were doing though, and sold a mouse and keyboard separately, knowing that many consumers may want to make the switch, and unfortunately for them, nobody wanted to buy the damn thing, let alone convert it into a PC. The CDTV sold horribly, as most people who enjoyed the Amiga platform chose to wait for the dedicated CD-ROM attachment instead of this overpriced prosumer-targeted faux piece of hi-fi equipment. Commodore didn't wait long to try for another CD-based child, as they slid out the Amiga CD32 just 2 years later in '93. The CD32 looked much more like your traditional video game console, though you could still upgrade it through aftermarket parts to essentially turn it into a personal computer. The system came out hot, releasing at Christmas time in Europe, and beat out the Mega CD, known to Americans as the Sega CD, in overall sales. However, Commodore was up against the wall, dealing with a federal injunction in the United States, preventing them from releasing the system in the American market. This was due in part to a patent royalty Commodore needed to pay because of technology used inside the system. The system was never officially released in the States, but people got their hands on them regardless. A Canadian launch meant that American retailers could import the system for sale. The Amiga CD32 suffered a swift death, as after only 8 months on the market, it was discontinued as Commodore went belly up, declaring bankruptcy. The only semi-official sales numbers state that around 100,000 units were sold in Europe. Despite having less than a year on shelves, almost 150 games were released for the system, most of which appeared on other platforms or were home computer ports. With Commodore going bankrupt and Atari coughing out its final breaths, it really felt like the end of the classic video game company era, as those brands, plus companies like Intellivision, had been put out of their misery by the new kings Sega and Nintendo. Of course, Atari had to jump into the pit and try and love someone. Atari's been trying to recapture what they did in the 1970s since the 1970s. Beginning with the last system we talked about, the CD32, and the bulk of the rest of what we're going to talk about, you'll begin to see a theme. A lot of these CD-based systems all released around 1993 to 1994. It was the very definition of flooding the market, which is exactly what destroyed Atari in the first place. Obviously, with hindsight being 2020, anyone could have seen the collapse of this very fragile tower of discs. Much like the bust in the 80s with the Atari clones cannibalizing the industry and lackluster game releases, history was doomed to repeat itself. Why not have the company who led us all to almost the very end of the video game industry itself jump on the hot trend of the time and release a CD-based console, and not only do it, but do it at the tail end of its popularity? Atari's Jaguar promoted itself as the first 64-bit system. It wasn't. It was their attempt to regain their place on the throne of the video game kingdom. The system sold terribly, only getting an estimated 150,000 units sold and into homes. It lives on mostly as a joke on the internet, being endlessly spoofed in YouTube videos and unoriginal articles on video game blogs. That didn't stop Atari though from trying everything they could to keep their big cat hopes alive. Enter the Jaguar CD, releasing in 1995, way past when everyone was tolerating the CD fad, as consumers were able to see what really could be done with the format, as the PlayStation released just 2 months prior in America. The add-on suffered numerous delays, and when all was said and done, only had 11 titles released for it. All but 3 games for the system released at launch in 1995, with a singular title, Braindead 13, releasing in 1996. Oddly enough, 2 games released in 1997, long after a well-placed bullet was put into the lingering dying corpse of a console. While other systems I've talked about already, and will later on in this video, failed horribly, not a success among them, I don't think any of them were as sad as the Jaguar, a once mighty company clinging out for any foothold they could grasp. It was very much the end of one era and the beginning of another. Once the PlayStation hit the market, people were quick to forget their Nintendo and Sega consoles, let alone the lifeless bloat floating on top of a toxic sea of trend-hopping console manufacturers like Atari. The final 3 of our consoles today are what I would consider the best of the bunch, though is that really saying much? Let's begin with the Phillips CDi. What's interesting about the CDi is that Phillips initially tried to downplay it as a video game console to try and not compete in that market. They pitched the system as a family-focused product to integrate into the average home. It offered software aimed at both adults and kids with digital board games, self-help products, and educational titles. A few games were tossed in here and there, but at the beginning, it was definitely seeming like they were trying to make a PC-light piece of hardware, which, as we've learned from Commodore's failure, wasn't what people were looking for at all. With the CDI launching at the tail end of '91, it wasn't until 1993 where we started to see major gaming titles releasing on the platform. 1993 alone had games like The Seventh Guest, which was an influential title on the home computer, Mystic Midway, an actual exclusive to the CDI, and of course the infamous pair of Legend of Zelda titles, Link: The Faces of Evil and Link: Wand of Gamelon. The other Zelda game, Zelda's Adventure, released the following year. Despite the new focus and mandate from Phillips to developers and publishers to ramp up game production, the system continued to have bizarre, I guess you would consider these educational materials, released like a digitized version of the book The Joy of Sex. While the games were starting to populate, sales of the system weren't. There aren't any concrete numbers for actual sales, with Phillips stating that 1 million units were sold worldwide, and the Wall Street Journal estimating that about half of those came from the United States. Regardless, 1 million units of a console in the early to mid-90s meant that you were far from competing with the likes of Nintendo and Sega, who offered pure gaming experiences at a fraction of the cost. Simply put, the CD experiment and all that went with it suffered from early adopter syndrome. It's a revolutionary technology built too soon, functioning at too low a level, and with developers still trying to figure out what can be done with the format and quick-changing technology. There's a reason why still to this day, you hear PC gaming enthusiasts aching over when to upgrade their system, as a better part may release 6 months later. While it's not quite that bad these days, in the 90s it very much rang true. The CDI limped on all the way to 1998 and was finally discontinued, but software had for the large part stopped releasing upwards of 2 years prior. Phillips again tried to pivot away from gaming, as it had already pivoted away from family entertainment in the first place by pitching remaining CDI stock as a solution for interactive kiosks for businesses. With the brief system overview out of the way, we obviously have to discuss perhaps the oddest part of the CDI's legacy, and that's the partnership between Phillips and Nintendo. The story has been told countless times, so I'll save you the long, boring details and hit you with the bullet points. Nintendo wanted to branch out and make a CD-based system. Nintendo sent their wizard overlord lawyer and general company grand poobah, Howard Lincoln, to the Netherlands and pulled the rug out from under Sony. The rest is pretty much history. Sony finds out about this news the same time as the public does at CES 1991. This then prompts Ken Kutaragi of Sony to forge its own path and push Sony to make its own console. The PlayStation 1 releases in 1995 and leaves Nintendo in its wake. The CD-based system from Phillips and Nintendo never materializes, but some games do release for the CDI based on this partnership. Nintendo allows Phillips to take 2 of its iconic franchises, Legend of Zelda and Super Mario, and produces 4 games. Hotel Mario actually isn't a bad little game, but my god, those Zelda titles are a dumpster fire being hurled into a tire fire. The 3DO interactive multiplayer, I feel, gets a bad rap. I genuinely believe that it was a legit video game console. It wasn't just a fading company's attempt at staying relevant, or a non-video game company trying to get a piece of the pie. It's the second best-selling console I'm talking about today, and it is somewhat impressive and to a degree memorable game library. Panasonic made some very interesting choices with the 3DO, like having to daisy-chain controllers together to be able to have more than one player. The 3DO company was the brainchild of dashing video game man Trip Hawkins, perhaps best known for founding Electronic Arts. He left that company to work with New Technologies Group, who made the console and planned on licensing the technology to whoever wanted to do something with it, and got off to a hot start. The level of hype for the 3DO was huge. Time magazine named it Product of the Year in 1993. But to be fair, they also named me Person of the Year in 2006. Trip Hawkins was 40 years old when the 3DO released, and I was only 18 when I was Person of the Year, so you tell me who's more impressive. The licensing aspect of the console is actually pretty fascinating, as it led to different models being released by Sanyo, Panasonic, and Gold Star, who is now LG. Each manufacturer took a different approach to the design of the physical console, leading to some being more desirable than others. The flip-top system from Panasonic, known as the FZ-10 REAL, is what most people are looking for these days, as the automatic tray models from Gold Star are much more likely to break down and are harder to repair. Beyond that, American Laser Games, an arcade manufacturer of light gun games, actually shoved modified 3DO hardware into their arcade cabinets to power their games. The company was all in on the 3DO tech and even developed the at-home light gun accessory for the 3DO, which is a must-own as the system has plenty of light gun games in its library. Like I said, the 3DO gets a bad rap, but it had a robust game catalog, plus it was down to fuck, as there were quite a few, let's just say, adult titles to choose from. Hell, popular porn company Vivid had an entire digital game division at the time pumping out pixelated smut for the 3DO. Like I said, we're not focusing on games today, definitely stay tuned in the future for that. In the meantime, if you want to see an example of an actual interesting 3DO title, check out Snow Job. If everything we're talking about today is a boat, then the Sega CD is the king yacht, like one of those yachts that's got Jack and Rose doing the Titanic pose as a hood ornament. It's the only one of these systems that at one point I actually owned and was actively collecting for. I don't know why, but I have a serious soft spot for it. Maybe because it had a wonderful mix of terrible FMV games, but also a few solid traditional gems like Sega CD, as well as some amazing RPGs like Lunar. The system was actually not standalone. It required you to have a Sega Genesis. Sega was the master of Frankensteining together tech advances for their home console. Whether it was an add-on that allowed you to go backwards and play Master System games, or a little performance boost like the 32X. If you went whole hog on the Sega at the end of it, you had a monster of a system weighing close to 700 pounds. Eventually, the Sega CD did sort of get its own console with the CDX, which is what I ended up having, though I kept a Model 2 Sega CD around just in case, as all of them were prone to breaking down. The Sega CD got off to a hot start, as it was very well received both here in the United States and overseas in Japan. Blockbuster signed up to rent units in their stores, and by the end of its first year, it had moved 200,000 units in the US, whereas Japan lagged behind with about half that. Sega of America's marketing and strategy, headed up by Tom Kalinske, was doing wonders, pushing it as a true next-level experience in video games. It didn't quite get the backup of software, though, to make their claims true. However, all this momentum would soon come to a crashing halt as everyone's favorite, the United States Congress, stuck its nose in. While it's a topic for another day, the congressional hearings about violence in video games was centered mostly around two games, Mortal Kombat and one of the signature Sega CD games, Night Trap. While yes, the controversy gave Sega a major boost in popularity and press, it didn't push sales for the Sega CD. While you could also argue that it demotivated developers from pushing further into FMV titles for the platform, as no one wanted to be next on the government and parental groups hit list. The Sega CD continued on for a few more years, and did move more disk drives than any other system on this list, with 2.2 million units sold. However, Sega internally moved on way faster than anticipated, with them wanting to shift focus for the coming Sega Saturn. Support for the system dwindled over the years, and has become one of the go-to reasons for blame on why the system failed. To me though, did it really actually fail? Commercially, yes, of course it did. But none of these consoles were going to light the world on fire. Consumers weren't ready for it. The technology wasn't quite there yet. And the traditional console was still going to reign supreme for years to come. Obviously, disc-based consoles very quickly overtook cartridges once the technology had caught up to developer and designer aspirations. But the Sega CD carved out its own special place, reigning above all other early disc-based consoles. The games were good. There just weren't that many of them. And there just wasn't enough support internally at Sega from the key decision makers, as they wanted to move forward and try and continue to compete against Nintendo head-on, let alone not knowing that the bullet to their brain from Sony was well on its way. So that's it. A nice trip down memory lane and a snapshot of a medium in constant metamorphosis. We were still very much in the Wild West of not only video game design, but hardware design. We're definitely going to talk bizarre early CD and FMV games more in depth in the future, but for now, take it easy, and I'll catch you next time.